I want to invite Sabine, Sabine Verheyen, who is the chair of the Culture Committee, to join us now. Hello, Sabine.
Hello, are you there? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Fine, wonderful. So,
Great, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Excellent. Sabine, tell us, first give us a sense of where we are right now in terms of, given we've all been watching the news, you know what's happening currently. There's been this, fundamental agreement. We've heard David Sassoli say what he said. Everyone says culture and arts are important. We all know in our lives, we know that, and it's, when we think about the culture and arts sector, it's a broad church, if you like. So cinemas are dying, other venues are dying, and people are doing things differently in free space like streets, etc., elsewhere where they can. Tell us where it stands at the moment in terms of this agreement that's been reached, and how much can we rely on it, and any other points you want to make in response to where we find ourselves at the moment. Over to you, Sabine.
Yeah, thank you very much. First, I would like to say that this year has really been an absolute challenging year for all of us. Our lives are very different than they were 1 year ago, and also the way how we had to negotiate and discuss, especially when it comes to the multi-annual framework, was quite different to how it was in the previous times. The coronavirus has affected almost every aspect of our lives, and explicitly it has affected the culture and creative sector. And that was the reason why we had to stand up. We had to raise awareness. We had to discuss with the colleagues also in the budget committees to raise awareness, or not just. And I think it's one of the most important issues of meanings of the cultural and creative sector is to be the glue for democracy, the glue for our societies. But what we have to show out very clearly was that it's also a very huge and very important economical factor in the European economy. We have 4.2% of the GDP coming out of the cultural and creative industries and sectors. And we have more than 7 million, up to 8 million working places in this sector. And that's not just a little bit, it's really a huge amount of people and mainly young people working in the sector. And that was a point we had to raise very clear. So I was very happy that in the end, after having reductions through the proposals by Charles Michel in January this year, then the new proposal of the Commission, which was clearly under the former proposal that was made by the Commission in 2018, and would just be would even be less than the money we had that was available for the last 7 years. So I was very happy that during the negotiations it could be reached that we get a top up of 600 million euros for the Creative Europe program. I think that's a lot of money. It's not what the Parliament asked for, but I think it's really a big success in the situation we have. What's at the moment? At the moment, we have a situation that there is a general agreement on the MFF, also on the figures for especially the Creative Europe program.
Yes.
But at the moment, it is blocked due to the discussions with countries like Hungary, Poland, and like
Indeed.
I heard a few minutes ago, Slovenia is joining them. When it comes to the
rule of law issue,
rule of law mechanism. But I think that will not hit in general the agreement on the amount of money that will be made available to the different programs. But it is important for the general approach we will have. What we have to discuss and what's still under discussion is the question how the money will be distributed and spent.
Exactly.
And if there are some concrete points in the recovery fund. And that is a point where we still have to work on. Because in the resolution we had a clear demand for a 2% earmark for the cultural and creative sector. That's at the moment not clearly on the table. It is remarked in a recital in the Parliament's position for the negotiations, but we have to fight that and to insist on that the member states should, not just should, they have to spend money in the cultural and creative sector,
Excuse
because
me.
this sector is so important for the recovery, not just of the cultural and creative industries and the sector itself, but having in mind that culture and creative industries count on more than 30 up to 40% of the tourism sector, because 30 up to 40% of tourism is cultural tourism. Without cultural events, without big festivals, without museums, without cultural heritage, we will not have tourism in that way like it is. And if we want to recover different sectors, and also if you want to be more innovative, if you want to bring together new technologies, new industries, the digital world, with other new aspects, we need the creative people in the sector. And that's the reason why the sector is not just important, but it's really core to innovation and the recovery of the European Union in many ways.
Indeed, Sabine, and you know, no one would argue with you, and you know, congratulations to you and others who have, you know, really taken this seriously to heart and galvanized support across the Parliament. And as you say, whilst it's reassuring, the number hasn't changed in terms of the spend. We don't know how it will be spent, but also we don't know when agreement will be reached. And correct me if I'm wrong. After there's agreement, national parliaments have to vote on the package before it can actually then be released. And there's a time scale to that. And one of my concerns was, what are your thoughts on, there's a kind of, it might take 4 to 5 months, and we might see the sector, certain aspects of it, really nosedive in a way that we haven't experienced right now, given we're all currently in such a high COVID stakes environment. We don't know what's going to happen. People are talking about third wave, etc. Okay, there's a vaccine on the horizon, but we don't know whether that, you know, we've heard from experts that, you know, it's next year, next winter, when we'll see something more of a norm. What's your sense of what happens between now and then? And I suppose most importantly, given what we want to conclude with this discussion was that how do we mobilize support from the cultural arts sector, but also wider communities to power your elbow? And what else can they do to join a community to say, this is important, whilst others are saying, you know, my God, you know, the bailout for the private sector is important, etc. So just touch upon that for me. But I also have a question on Zoom from Jenny, who says something about how do we improve private sector collaboration, and you know, what role can you play in others to underpin but actually create some form of stability in the long term, because we don't see the private sector that fully involved in the arts as a partner for culture and arts in a consolidated fashion. Sabine, over to you. Complicated questions, I know, but there we are, we're in a complicated world.
First, we have to say that also the member states, in many member states in the European Union, they see the problems the cultural sectors is in due to the lockdowns and not having the possibility to perform in the way they are normally performing and making their business. What we see is that the awareness raising for this in the member states is much higher. We had already, also from European side, we opened up all the support schemes that were there also for other sectors, explicitly also to the cultural sector. It's always a question how member states implement that. There are many positive examples, but we also know that in some member states the support for the cultural sector is really not enough and not really there. So what we have to do is to enforce these member states to do something. That is what we did through the SURE program that was and the resilience funds we had money from different funds where we support the member states to help people who are unemployed or lose the possibility to make their business. What we needed and what is now established more are solutions for self-employed people, because the sector is structured in a quite diverse and in a quite, let's say, small scale business structure. We have many
Exactly.
small and medium-sized enterprises, self-employed people, which are not covered by the support programs of the support schemes that were available on the member states level. I think it was important that we raised awareness to these problems, and like in Germany or in others, they are now coming up with specific programs for these sectors. That's not enough, I know that, because coming back to a kind of normal will be the only solution, and then give the right support for innovation, for supporting we had also other challenges than just COVID-19 in the sector when it comes to digitization, when it comes to new structures, new distribution ways, and so on and so forth. So I think the recovery fund, when it comes, must be, let's say, a support also for innovation in the sector. It's not just to keep everything like it was, but also to help to set up in a modern, in a future-proof way. That cannot be done in between 1 or 2 weeks or in between a few weeks. So the 4 to 5 months until the money will flow is also needed to support the right programs, the right structures, and the right projects. But what is important is that the sector is not just seen out of the very, very small support schemes that are specific for the cultural sector, but that we have also other support schemes that can support and have to be made more tailor-made to the sector, like, for example, the European Structural Fund, the Social Fund, and other things when it comes to upskilling, reskilling in digital, for artists and so on. So there are many ideas what to do and how to do. The question will be how fast can we get a decided and finalized negotiation on the money. I would hope that Hungary and Poland come back to a, let's say, more constructive approach, because
it's very diplomatic of you, Sabine. Very diplomatic of you.
I normally say when people are respecting the rule of law, they don't have to fear the rule of law mechanism.
Well said. Thank you. And please do bear in mind, I'll bring you in when I say to the Zoom audience, please react to what you've heard from Sabine. What kind of mobilization, but I've heard from some very significant artists across the spectrum who are not eligible for the government grant schemes in terms of unemployment. And some of them who are international artists who've been advised to change career and say, actually, don't continue to being an international pianist or artist of painting, etc. Shift career. And my concern is what happens to the decimation of the sector and some of those stars and those emerging stars while we wait for Hungary and Poland and others to abide by these solutions. I want to bring in the Secretary General of the Cultural Arts Fund, Culture Action Europe. I always get it wrong. Sorry, Tere. It's lovely to welcome you again. Hello.
Hello, I'm here. Yeah, I can hear you, I can see you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like you to react to what you've heard. There's been certain demands made by the sector. We've heard there's been a level of success. And I think those who are watching and listening in is wanting to hear from you. What's your reaction to what you've heard and what some of the points that you'd like to share as to what needs to be done in this context of trying to make arts and culture winning the argument that it should be part of the recovery package and the recovery of Europe. Over to you, Tere.
Yeah, so as mentioned by President Sassoli and by Mrs. Verheyen, culture is, of course, a fundamental glue to hold the European project and the community, its community together. And we think that right now there is a momentum, a specific momentum, and an urgency to put culture at a central place in reimagining Europe. It is a time where big ideas on the future of Europe are needed, and they're starting to be implemented through these ambitious initiatives like the Green Deal, and of course through the negotiation on the biggest ever European budget, including the Recovery Fund. And this is why today we want, together with the European Cultural Foundation and Europa Nostra, we want to propose a cultural deal for Europe. because it is time to combine creative thinking and effective actions. Our cultural deal proposals is an umbrella strategy for giving a leading role to culture by putting it at the center of the European project. And I will start with the necessary recovery of the cultural ecosystem to move to what this means for the European project as a whole. Recovery for me here and for us means clearly not to go back to the same situation as we were before.
Yes.
Before the breakout, of course, because this was not a good situation at all. We drag the structural weak conditions of the cultural ecosystem, precarious working conditions of artists and cultural workers, threats for freedom of artistic expression due to the lack of protection for artists in radicalized policies, the fragile situation also for of small projects and small organizations, maybe also due to the difficult access to these micro-organizations to the European funds, or also the absence of cultural challenges and approaches in the creation and implementation of policies in a context of high digitization and so many other things. In general, I think we had a lack of centrality of cultural perspectives in the whole European project, which needs to be a cultural project in order to make sense for the whole European community. If we add the effects of the pandemic, the situation, of course, is very worrying. And the pandemic has accelerated and exacerbated this weakness of the cultural ecosystem. And if we do not act decisively, the effects will be devastating. Of course, many other sectors are deeply affected by the consequences of the pandemic, but added to the weakness I was mentioning, we also confront a structural lack of awareness by other policymakers and decision makers about the reality of the cultural and creative sectors and its potential. Sabine Verheyen was mentioning this 4.2% of the European GDP. Yes, of course, this is only creative industry, so we are not considering here the non-profit organizations that are also working and creating jobs and
exactly, yeah.
So therefore, we really need a cultural deal that works in a short, mid, and long term. And we need this at two levels, a structural level and a financial and technical level. For a structural level, a cultural deal should be able to identify the contribution of culture for the sake of the European political project. In order to do so, I think it should be reconsidered, so it should reconsider the position in the society for artists and creators, cultural workers, cultural organizations, through the impulse of a proper recognition at EU level of the status of the artists and creators, including advances in social security, fair employment, fair remuneration, and of course, also important, the inclusion of freedom of artistic expression in the rule of law mechanism, as it is crucial for democratic quality and plurality. And a cultural deal should also acknowledge the interdependence of all human actions. Culture is fundamental, an expression of the humankind, and is a fundamental right. Therefore, we need to facilitate cultural experimentation, cultural practices, and cultural access. But we also need to go beyond sectoral perspectives and bring culture in the transdisciplinary debates that are urgently needed for facing contemporary challenges. On the other side, we need deeper and consistent studies of the influence of culture in well-being, sustainability, economic, scientific, and technological development, and in environmental challenges. On the other side, we plea for including cultural approaches in the drafting of the EU policies to be implemented regarding the 2030 agenda, the Green Deal agenda, the Democracy Action Plan, the AI development, to mention some of them. And at the financial level, cultural deals should mean to create a strong mechanism to heal the cultural ecosystem. In the short and mid terms, and to effectively include, as was mentioned before, culture as a strategic ecosystem in the Recovery Fund. Back in May, we were all a bit relieved to see culture and creative sectors as one of the 14 ecosystems to be prioritized by Next Generation EU. But since then, we have seen very little from the Commission to follow up on this intention. And also in May, we were asking to earmark dedicated percentage for culture in the National Recovery and Resilience Plans. And in the meantime, there is a wide consensus in the cultural sector that it is something extremely needed. A couple of weeks ago, Culture Action Europe had the pleasure to coordinate a joint initiative with 110 European cultural networks and organizations, many of them here today, addressing the member states directly to fully include culture in the national plans. So, and asking the Commission to encourage this earmarking. And there I want to really thank the Cult Committee for its trial is supporting this plea.
Okay.
But we want to encourage the Parliament to find ways to monitor cultural investment in the recovery funds, and that the member states will hopefully implement. And in the long term, and I'm finishing with this, we have the multi-annual financial framework mechanism and the final negotiation of the programs. We also congratulate the increase, the Culture Committee for the increase of the Creative Europe budget, and we hope that this will strengthen cultural cooperation. But as already mentioned, we still need to mainstream culture across the policy priorities of the coming years.
Sure.
Beyond its purely aesthetic contribution, and this is very clear. So arts and culture offer explorative, interrogative approaches to the world and the way we inhabit it. And a holistic strategy for a collective, equal, and sustainable development needs a cultural pillar in its own right. As the cultural dimension, as was mentioned, cannot be forgotten in shaping societal, environmental, and economic challenges. Cultural deal is about bringing together many different profiles and strong budget investment that would put culture at as a powerful catalyst for the future of the European Common Project, which will be indeed not about only going back to where we were used to, but to imagine new ways, so this paradigm shifts and the new answers to all the new challenges.
Sure. Tere, thank you for that. I have a reaction. I want to invite one of your colleagues, Sabine, an MEP, Ninas. Hello, Niklas.
Hello. Thank you very much. Yes,
hello. Warm welcome.
Thank you. Very good point that you raised in the end. That's something actually that we need to think about more in the future. The time is right now. So when we're talking about the structural funds, as much as the recovery funds, they are all being programmed right now. I mean, officially, they are allowed to start after we have finished voting on the documents. But in practice, this means that the regional authorities are already working on it, obviously. And this is the time now for everybody in the community to really go and lobby for the issue to implement culture in them. What we have done and what we have ensured is that it's always possible to have culture in there. We have, as you might know, used the CCFG and the official plenary statement to ask for or demand for 2% of the RRF being spent on the culture sector. That is now not finally in the text. That's very sad. We're still working on to implement it still in some way so that the member states are bound to do it actually. But in there, but also in all structural funds, culture is possible to be funded. And even the European Court of Audit has said that the structural funds in the past have not been used excessively for cultural structures. And that is something that you need to make sure on the ground, that you go to the regional authorities and ensure that the implementation is being done and that culture is available in the implementation phase. There are the possibility to have talks with the public that is actually deemed necessary for the implementation of the plans. And this is the moment when everybody on the ground needs to go get involved and ensures this. And then also in the later stage, that you use the funds that are possible and apply for projects and actually do it over the structural funds as well. We are very happy that we got the 600 million euros increase for Creative Europe that we worked hard for, but obviously we cannot fund the whole sector only out of this 2.2 billion program. So the structural funds is really the go-to point, and please go to there right now and go to your regional authorities and lobby for implementing or bringing culture in there too.
Nicholas, thank you. Is that your one big message to those who are watching and listening to you right now as a politician that's working hard? You want people to go to the structural funds and say and shout out loud. Is there anything else you want them to do? What would help you in the next few months? No, hey, this is an open conversation. What do you need?
Yeah, of course. No, this is, I think, you know, there's this saying, give a man a fish and he can survive for a day. Teach him how to fish and he'll survive for the future. Mm-hmm. But at the moment, we're at this moment where we need fish on the table at the moment. That's why it's so important to go ahead and lobby for this. But of course, what we need more to do in the future is a project that I would like to see happening in the future is a social benefits net for artists and performers. And that is something that for that we have to lobby as well very strongly. And if we want to increase the funds for culture activities in the future and be more vocal on these issues, we need to start lobbying better. And that's the thing. The cultural sector lives off its diversity, but in the end, the importance for politics is always, if you can speak with one voice, you have it way much easier to actually implement your politics. And that's something that we as cultural politicians also rely on, to have a big lobby in the background that supports our calls to do more for culture with our other colleagues and with the heads of states, of the member states. And so that's maybe a thing that I have at least learned in the last year, that the culture community needs to come together more in certain issues and be very vocal on very certain issues to get more done in the end.
So Nicholas, the message to all of you watching, listening, is more unification in terms of your kind of demand, but also your approach, and, you know, be on his case, be on his and Sabine's case, but power their elbow with support, both at a local but MEP level. And one of the things, you know, all of you, I think, and politicians, but also those of you in the audience, you know, one of the things that we forget and lose sight of is that culture and arts are a fundamental underpinning of making the union and its identity work. It has the potential to bridge the divide between a left and right and center, and actually creates an opportunity to really live the values of what the European Union's about. Without it, we'll see greater senses, a sense of what we see as the shift to the right, and actually, and arts and culture can play a part in creating bridges, but also unity of identity of what it is to be a European here today in the 21st century. On that note, I want to bring in another MEP, Sandro Gozzi. Welcome.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Hi. A very warm welcome to you.
Hi.
So what would you like to say? How have you react? What would you react? What's your reaction to what you've heard so far? And what particular point would you want to, what's the message you want to give to this audience of, you know, arts practitioners and cultural movers and shakers and those on the ground across Europe in terms of what needs to happen? What's your reaction? Over to you, Sandro.
Well, my reaction, of course, I fully agree. I fully support everything has been said so far. I want to also underline that a good colleague of mine, Laurence Farang, work a lot with Sabine Verheyen, with the other member of the European Parliament in the Culture Committee to advance on these fundamental priorities. You mentioned the resolution, so I wanted, first of all, it was right to recall the work of a good colleague like Laurence. On my perspective, I mean, I want to repeat what has been said. I just go back to history because, and when you want to prepare the future, especially in culture, but not only, it's always very good to go back to history. So, I mean, today I'm talking to you from Italy. I'm talking to you from Rome. And in 1348, we had a very, very strong plague in Florence, which killed 3/5 of the Florence population. It was, so we were at the end of the Middle Age. And after the plague, the Renaissance began. So the first message is after mankind already in the past has shown that to get out of deep social, economic health crisis, culture is always has been one of our best allies, and must be so also to get out of this crisis, which is, as it has been already recalled, health, social, and economic crisis. So I fully support the fact that we have to work at European national level for this 2% of the national recovery plan devoted to culture. I think it is essential. I think that we have also to prepare the ground to really defend culture beyond the very necessary money. You have already talked about Creative Europe. I would add also that we have worked a lot to increase the budget of the Erasmus program. It's not what we wanted. But as a very former Erasmus student, one of the first, I was a pioneer, I know how much it contributes to the culture, the mobility scheme, especially for youth. We wanted to know, when I was in minister, I said I wanted to multiply by 10 the Erasmus money. We are not there yet, but certainly there's also the fact that we have increased and we got 2.2 billion euro for Erasmus. It is another element which is very important in this picture, in our commitment for culture. But I mean, the point is that we must bet on our new renaissance, very much on culture, looking at the ecological transition, looking at the digital transition, looking at the challenge of competitiveness. All these aspects have something, a possible golden thread for our European, our added value to the world, which is culture. And also from this perspective, I agree with what you're saying, that culture allows us to go beyond the traditional political cleavages. I think also that we have to better protect culture. I mean, I hope that all the member states will be quicker to implement, for example, the copyright directive, because to protect copyright and to protect creation in this new phase is another
point well made.
Another step ahead. So I mean, a message of hope from this part of Europe, and full support to you and to the work, the excellent work that in the Culture Committee my colleagues have played, and the work that we all together must do in the days and weeks ahead of us. Let me say that we have also a fundamental issue of culture, which is fundamental rights. Rule of law and fundamental rights are part of European civilization. And this is why we have to continue to pretend that the new money, the fresh money, the recovery plan, the budget for the next years is given to those who respect fundamental values. This is the biggest contribution of us Europeans to the world civilization. And I fully agree with Sabine Verheyen. If you don't violate rule of law, you don't have anything to fear when it comes to respect a principle of rule of law. So we must go ahead. There are 3 countries who are trying to block, but I think that we will win this battle. And it is also important because it's also a cultural, a democratic battle we are fighting for everybody in Europe.